Hello?
Hello? All right, good evening and welcome to the September 7th special voting meeting of the Exeter Township Board of School Directors. If you could please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Fike, if you could do a roll call, please.
Allison Wilson,
Here?
Hunter Ahrens,
Here.
John Fiddler,
Here.
Dr. Ann Herring,
Here.
Dr. David Hemberger,
Here.
Michael Japina, Huri Miller,
Here.
Michelle Stratton,
Here.
8 present.
Before we get started this evening, I would like to announce that the board met in executive session on August 15th to discuss personnel matters and August 31st to discuss safety measures. Okay, we do need to amend the agenda a little bit. It is recommended that the Board of School Directors amend the published agenda for tonight's meeting as follows. The added voting item 4A, appointment of new board member. The reason for the addition or change is to add a motion to the original agenda.
Is this a second? Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Okay, we now are into our public comment section, and we did not have anyone register this evening for public comment. Okay, moving on to the appointment of our new board member. It is recommended that the Board of School Directors appoint Anthony Chowdhury as a school board director to replace Sharon McClendon. This appointment is a 3-month appointment which will expire in December of 2021.
Second.
There is a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Okay, we will move on to the appointment. And Mr. Chowdhury will take the oath of office. All officially done? Okay. Okay. Do I give this to you? Okay, moving on to the Education Committee, Mr. Fiddler.
It is recommended that the Board of School Directors approve an agreement between Maura Lundstrom and the Exeter Township School District to provide Wilson reading services at a rate of $50 per hour.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion?
No discussion. I do have a question. If we could have perhaps a brief description of what Wilson reading services are. I'm not familiar with that from somebody.
Thank you. So Wilson Reading System is a program that is a reading program that is based off a method called the Orton-Gillingham method. And that method is a very specific, intensive methodology for students who have some very specific reading difficulties. And I'll take you back to several board meetings ago. I talked about some of our literacy programs and building up capacity with our literacy programs. And we are having our own teachers trained in the Wilson Reading System, some of our strategic teachers within our buildings. That process takes a little while, though. It takes up to 2 years to complete that whole thing. So in the meantime, Maura has been helping to provide services for our students.
Thank you.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Moving on to the Personnel Committee, Mr. Jupina.
Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. I would like to move on all of these except letter B under administrative staff under change of status. I'd like to go into executive session on that matter.
Could I also ask you to remove under guest teachers letter D? I didn't catch this originally.
Letter which?
Letter D under guest teachers, under number 2.
Okay, so it's recommended the Board of School. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go through these one by one. So it's recommended the Board of School Directors approves or ratifies the following Personnel Committee items. Number 1, under number 1.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries.
It's recommended the Board of School Directors approves or ratifies the following Personnel Committee items. Under number 2, all but D under guest teachers.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries.
So Hunter, are you just going to abstain on that or? Okay. So it's recommended the Board of School Directors approves or ratifies the following personnel committee items under number 2, under guest teachers, item D.
Second.
Any discussion?
Yes, due to a pre-existing familial relationship, I will be abstaining from this. I did the same last year when we did appointments for guest teachers, and I'll submit the requisite paperwork to Donna tomorrow.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions?
Abstain.
Motion carries.
It's recommended the Board of School Directors approves or ratifies the following personnel committee items under number 3, change of status, all except administrative staff letter B.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
If I can just, I would just request a very quick executive session on that matter. After the vote, yes.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries.
Mrs.
I'll
Wolf,
go,
prior to that, Mr. Jabina, if you wouldn't mind, Ms. Hodge is in the audience, and I would just like to ask her to come to the podium and introduce herself to the
Absolutely.
board.
sure, certainly.
So just a little background, we're very excited to have Ms. Hodge just be approved to be the Lorraine principal, effective upon her release from the Reading School District. She'll be replacing Mr. Isselman, who asked for a change of status to a teaching position earlier in this school year. And hers was a change of status because we had originally hired her to be the assistant principal at the junior high school. But given her resume and experience, we thought she'd be an excellent choice for Lorraine. So we will be posting for the junior high school assistant principal tomorrow. So Mr. Brown's going to have to wait a little bit longer. But if you'd like to say a few words.
So I'm really smiling under my mask. So thank you for this honor. I couldn't be happier to join your wonderful community. I do come with a vast amount of experience. I taught in Governor Mifflin for 8 years, and I've been in the Reading School District for 6. Currently, I'm serving as the assistant principal at 10th and 10, and I'm just excited to come on board and work with this amazing administrative team and the staff at Lorraine. So I'm just happy to be here and happy to just be a part of this wonderful community.
Thank you very much.
I was just going to do the last item here then. So it's recommended the Board of School Directors approves or ratifies the following personnel committee items on number 4, leaves of absence.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries.
I move that we recess into executive session regarding personnel matters, to return and vote after that.
I would request that Dr. Holler and Mr. Fike join the board and I for that recess. We can meet in the conference room.
Okay, welcome back. Mr. Japina, do you want to continue?
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Wilson. It is recommended the Board of School Directors approves or ratifies the following Personnel Committee items. Under change of status, administrative staff, letter B, employee 2022172.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions?
I'm going to
Motion-
abstain. 20 Shouter.
One abstention? Motion carries.
Mr. Lockinger, just for clarity, with a new board member, is there any need for him to do anything relative to the abstention?
In this case, no, because, I mean, I'm assuming the abstention is just because you're just not aware of the situation.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Is there anything else from any board member? Okay. Then I will make a motion to adjourn this meeting. Or if I don't hear any arguments, I will adjourn it. This meeting's adjourned. Okay, and now we will start our board workshop meeting. Welcome to the September 7th Committee of the Whole meeting of the Exeter Township Board of School Directors. Mr. Fike, if you could do a roll call, please.
Allison Wilson,
Here?
Hunter Ahrens,
Here.
Anthony Chowdhury,
Here.
John Fiddler,
Here?
Dr. Ann Herring,
Here.
Dr. David Hemberger,
Here.
Michael Japina,
Here.
Huri Miller,
Here.
Michelle Stratton,
Here.
all present.
Thank you. Okay, you can see under letter C that the minutes from August are posted. Does anybody have anything that they would like to correct or anything? Nope. Okay. We do not have to do anything, correct, Mr. Lockinger, for amended agenda here. We're just going to have, yeah.
No, I mean, no, you're not voting on anything, right? Then,
We don't usually need this on our committee of the whole.
no, that's only, it's based on the new Sunshine Act is really what it's there for. And since you're not taking any official action, you're okay.
I just, Mr. Lockinger, I believe that Ms. Montaigne had it there because at the end we do take action to forward those items on to the voting meeting. So I believe we were told to put it on all agendas.
Okay. That, and that's fine. I mean, but you're not amending anything.
We're not
in the
tonight, so
situation.
it'll just be a placeholder for the sunshine purposes.
That's what
On some evenings, we'll be skipping it.
you are correct.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on then to our new chair of the Education Committee, Mr. Fiddler.
Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. We're going to start off this section of the meeting with a report from our superintendent, Dr. Kim Miner. Dr. Miner?
Thank you, Mr. Fiddler. So first of all, welcome as the chair of the Education Committee. Mr. Fiddler as the chair and I met along with Dawn Harris. Dawn Harris as the head of the Pupil Services, and Eric Flam as Director of Teaching and Learning, basically represent the administrative side of the Education Committee. Unfortunately, I messed up the calendar, and therefore Dr. Flam was not able to join us, but that was my fault. The purpose of that meeting was to get to know John as our new chair and to talk about laying out our vision for the Education Committee throughout the entirety of the school year. So we had an excellent conversation. And this evening, what I'm going to be sharing with you is an adapted version of the presentation that I shared with all of our staff on our opening day. We had 6 separate staff meetings due to COVID. And during those meetings, I reviewed with them our district goals of getting to 100. Those goals began their emergence really initially, I would say, with my interview with the board, and then through my entry plan. One of the items was interviewing and speaking with stakeholders as well as reviewing data. And it became clear that Exeter's academic data was very concerning on a lot of levels. And so as a board and your superintendent, we've spent a lot of time discussing those concerns and have adopted this goal, if Mr. Way, if you go to the next slide, of having basically the goal of what we call triple hundreds, or 100 times 3, which is 100% of students reading at grade level by 3rd grade, 100% of students proficient at math by 7th grade, and 100% of our students graduating. And throughout the course of last school year, even amidst all of the pandemic conversations, we visited this topic a number of times. We discussed it at a number of education committee meetings, and it serves as the basis of our district's strategic plan. So as we budgeted, made staffing changes, etc., the core is this idea of these 3 100% goals. And the board has signed on to them as board goals. I've signed on to them as part of my superintendent goals. And part of the presentation was to really have a conversation at a building level with our staff about what these goals meant for our students in practice. So, Mr. Way, if you would go to the next slide, please. So one of the things that I wanted to make sure that I spoke about to the staff, and we do have a number of new staff this year who hadn't heard these things previously, and I'll take this opportunity to remind the board why those 3 goals in particular. First of all, the foundational goal to all of the others is the reading by 3rd grade goal. Having students read at grade level by 3rd grade makes all of the other goals and pretty much everything else that will happen in a student's career and really their life as an adult possible. Students who don't read cannot perform math. If you think about mathematics, it is comprehension plus computation, so you have to understand what the question asks you first. It's very difficult to graduate. It's very difficult to function in the world if you're a non-reader. So that is a pivotal goal. A couple of things that are frequently cited. One is that up till 3rd grade, you are learning to read, and after 3rd grade, you are reading to learn. And so really absorbing content in social studies, science, other topics, it's really critical to have the ability to comprehend. And, there's an oft-quoted item that California builds its prisons based on reading proficiency in the elementary grades because it's such a predictor of future just unsuccessful adulthoods that lead to prison populations when students can't read. So it is really a defining moment for students, is that window in our K-4 building. So specifically, by the end of 3rd grade, we have the PSSA and other measures that let us see our students' progress. Math at grade 7 is typically the time before students are entering Algebra 1. Algebra 1 is the foundational math class for future maths and becomes really pivotal for students' math success. So making sure students are proficient by grade 7 is another critical benchmark. And then finally, making sure that our students, after spending 13 years with us in most cases, successfully graduate with their cohort and walk across the stage with a diploma, and then can go on to their lives in career, military, post-secondary education, etc. The second part of the why that a lot of people ask, maybe more than why the first 3 goals, is isn't 100% an unrealistic or an unattainable goal. We have students who come from tremendous poverty. Isn't that unrealistic? We have students who don't speak English as their first language. Isn't that unattainable? We have students who have special education needs. Again, unrealistic that they would be proficient. And my response to that question about whether it's unrealistic or unattainable has to do with the picture there below. That's a picture from our district Facebook, students at Rifeston. And since the days of being a principal myself, when I really started to think about educational data, I think it's really important that we step away from just numbers and percentages, which we're going to talk a lot about today, but recognize that each one of those percentages is representative of a child who's a human, who has a future, who will have to feed a family someday. And they're also someone's child. And many of us around the table are parents. And the responsibility we have to those parents to be able to say that when you put your child in our care, you're going to get the desired result, which is your child is safe and that they get the education that they deserve. And so I like to have a picture of students, because I'll say to people, if you had 100 students, those faces in the room, and you're happy with an 80% proficiency rate or 90%, which 10 students, which 20 students are you comfortable putting up against a wall and saying, I'm okay if you can't read. I'm okay if you can't do math proficiently. I'm okay if you can't graduate. And what I said to staff, and I will say to the board as well, if you're okay with that, I don't think you should be here, really. And so I ask people, if you really would be comfortable taking a group of students and saying, I'm fine if you can't read, do math, or graduate, I think now is a good time to find your joy elsewhere. It's a great employment market right now. But we need everybody in our organization to be committed to every child's success. And I think, as I went building to building, I think that message really resonated. And I think that our staff is really committed to the success of all of our students. So it was a good opening day in that regard. And I think that was an important message to remind people that each number and statistic is really representative of a child. Next slide, please, Mr. Way. So as a board, during our retreat, we read the book Good to Great. We read it as a team of administrators last year. We revisited it again at our administrative retreat this year. And one of the fundamental tenets, as you all know, in the book Good to Great, except Mr. Chaudhry, I'll make sure you get a copy of it, is the Stockdale paradox, which speaks about Admiral James Stockdale, who was a prisoner of war. Jim Collins interviewed him and said, who made it out of the prisoner of war camps, or who didn't, rather. And Admiral Stockdale said, well, that's easy. The optimist didn't make it out. And Jim Collins said, well, how could that be? Why would the optimist not make it out? And Jim Collins said, because they would say, we'll be out by Thanksgiving. And then they weren't out. We'll be out by Christmas. And then they weren't out. We'll be out by Easter. And they would die of a broken heart. And he said, well, who is next? And he said, the pessimists, because they never believed that they could do it in the first place. And so they didn't make it out. And he said the people who made it out were the people who were willing to accept the brutal truth of their current reality, but not lose faith that they could overcome it in the end. And so the Stockdale paradox is this quotation: you must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they may be. And so when we read Good to Great as an administrative team, and when we read it as a board team, one of the things that was really important for me in terms of having everyone read that was to say, we have to acknowledge and address that the academics at Exeter are not acceptable. And they haven't been acceptable for years. And we have to be really straightforward about exactly how unacceptable they are. Because it's only with that knowledge that then we can commit ourselves through our strategic plan, through our budgeting process, through our actions at this table, through our actions in classrooms every day, to improving the situation. And that when superintendents, assistant superintendents, tell boards that the data doesn't matter, or the data doesn't in fact indicate, a failure, then boards take the budget process, they take the strategic plan process, and they focus on non-academic goals. I'm very proud of the fact that when I started to talk to the board last year about these numbers and what they meant, that this board committed itself entirely to making this central, this improvement central to what we do with budgeting, what we do with our strategic plan, what I'm held accountable to, and everyone in this organization is held accountable to. So the next couple of slides are data that you have seen before, but I think, again, we can't say enough. Thank you. We can't say enough what the current state of our reality is, no matter how brutal it is. So, Mr. Way, if you would go to the next slide, please. So, oops. Mr. Way, is there a slide before that? Thank you. Oh, there you go. So, in this slide, I thought it was important, again, and I shared this with the staff on opening day, and this is the data that I shared with you throughout the course of the year, to look pre-pandemic, because I think everybody in the nation acknowledges that the pandemic was damaging to educational progress for the vast majority of students, and that is, in fact, why the ESSER grants have largely been issued, both to some extent initially for COVID mitigation, but then also to a large extent for learning loss that was anticipated to occur during the pandemic. So I didn't want the data to be excused by, well, that's a result of the pandemic. So this is data up until 2019, before COVID-19 was on anybody's radar. And when I look at bar charts, and again, I've shared this with the board before, but it bears repeating, and what I shared with the staff, now, Mr. Way, if you could go to the next slide, is that I'm very much less interested in what the bar shows than what the bar is missing. So that red bar are the students who are not reading by grade 3 in 2018-2019. 47% of the students at Jackson Wald, 42% of the students at Lorraine, 31% of the students at Owatton. And that is largely the differential between Owatton and Lorraine and Jackson Wald is a demographic differential. Lorraine and Jackson Wald are Title I schools, so you would anticipate a data differential in those schools. But again, students are not successful at reading, and that's relatively consistent over 5 years of data from 2014 through 2019. Next slide, please, Mr. Way. By 8th grade, 66% of our students in 2018-2019 were not proficient on the PSSA. 2/3 of our students in math, not proficient. That's a startling number. It is a brutal number. But again, it's the number that the board recognized when we set ourselves to these goals as the truth of our current reality. Mr. Way, the next slide, please. What that means ultimately is that Exeter's graduation rate is in the bottom half of the state of Pennsylvania. It's also in the bottom half of the nation. And so when you think about schools, pick your favorite low-performing state, Exeter is with those states. And again, there is nothing about this community, our student body, that makes this even at any rate understandable. There's nothing that really would account for Exeter performing at this level. So when you take the 2019 data and then you throw a pandemic on top of it, you would anticipate that it would be damaging. So we already started with bad data, and then we had a pandemic. I will say tonight I'm going to show you some of the summary data for the PSSAs from the spring of 2021. Normally, this is a data set, well, it is a data set that I think is highly problematic. We had a number of students who didn't participate in the PSSA because of the pandemic. We had students who were virtual who came in only for the test. I mean, there were a lot of complicating factors. So it is not a good data set. However, the truth of how brutal our academic achievement is right now lies somewhere between the 2019 data and the 2021 data. And so we'll just assume the worst for our purposes. But Mr. Way, if you would go to the 2021 data, again, this is preliminary, but I wanted to share it with the board right at the beginning of the year because I think it's critical that we take action on it. So if you look at the 2021 K4 data, this is across all 3 buildings average. In 3rd grade, we have a pass rate on the PSSA in math of 41%. In ELA, again, average between the 3 buildings, 53%. It's lower at Jackson Wald and Lorraine. In 4th grade math, a pass rate of 34% averaged across the 3 buildings. And in 4th grade ELA, a pass rate of 65% averaged across the 3 buildings. The next slide, please, Mr. Way, is the data at Rifton. There in ELA, a 61% pass rate in 5th grade, a 38% pass rate in 5th grade math. In 6th grade ELA, a 71% pass rate. In 6th grade math, a 37% pass rate. And at the junior high school, Mr. Ray, next slide, we have 58% pass rate in 7th grade ELA, a 30% pass rate in 7th grade math, 58% pass rate in 8th grade ELA, and a 27% pass rate in 8th grade math. So those are the brutal facts of our current reality. Again, is that a faulty data set because of the pandemic? It likely is. But when you think about a 27% proficiency in math versus a 34% in 2019, it's not that far off. The truth is somewhere in the middle, probably closer to the 27%. So that is the brutal facts of our current reality. However, as the Stockdale paradox tells us, we have to retain our faith that we can overcome that. And so let's talk about how we overcome it, review what's in our strategic plan and our plan for this year. Next slide, Mr. Way, please. So one of the things that I shared with the staff is that when you look at educational data, at least when I look at it, I think there's 3 broad buckets that you look at. First of all is if you have a student who has anomalous data, one student who is performing far worse than their peers, that student requires an intervention of some kind. If you have one teacher whose data is very anomalous, they're performing far worse than their peers, their colleagues, then that requires professional development for that teacher. When you see across the board, every grade level, every building, which is what we see at Exeter, students underperforming academically significantly, then that is a systems problem. That's not one teacher, that's not one group of students. That is a problem with the entire system at Exeter, which is ultimately a leadership problem because the leadership is responsible for the K-12 system here at Exeter. So this is not about pointing fingers at this group of teachers is bad or this grade level is bad or this group of students brings down our score. It's genuinely an entire systems problem. So we have to approach the systems problem by, number 1, looking at our leadership. Are we recruiting, retaining, training, and building leaders at all levels? We've been working really hard to do that. We've been doing professional development. We've had a lot of administrative change over the past year, and we continue to work on our team to make sure that we, as a leadership team, can take the district where it needs to go moving forward. We need the commitment from the board, which we have, and we need the board to maintain its focus on these 3 goals. A lot of times educational systems fail because each year there's some brand new set of goals, some brand new initiatives trotted out, and the previous ones are forgotten. This is something that requires sustained focus over many years. We didn't get to this point in 1 year. We didn't get to this point in 2 years. And so sustaining our focus on recovering from this is a multi-year proposition. And then the action of the board in a variety of different ways to support the school district in overcoming this, including leveraging ESSER strategically. It's fortuitous for us that we have this opportunity to use ESSER funds for academics specifically because we already were in a problematic position that was made worse by the pandemic. So when we presented on our ESSER expenditures, those were primarily targeted at academic achievement. So I mentioned that a problem of that size is a systems problem. So you have two approaches. One is a systems approach. How do we build our K-12 system at Exeter so that moving forward our students are far more successful and we achieve those 100 goals? But in the meantime, how do we triage for students who are already in our system, who are current 12th graders, 11th graders, 6th graders, who don't have the advantage of going through a completely reworked K-12 educational system here at Exeter? How do we make sure that those students also can be successful for the remainder of their school career? So to the systems end of things, we have invested in resources and materials. We really had, especially in the area of reading, virtually no quality materials, I would say, for our teachers to use whatsoever. The board, on behalf of the community, invested heavily in gold standard resources, the professional development around those, and we continue to look at that. Looking at time and our schedules as part of our systems, making sure that we're maximizing instructional time for students and that we have time across the district that reflects our instructional priorities, that we're not losing time in transitions and not wasting time because our students really can't afford to waste a minute right now. Looking at both our core programming, our standard academics, as well as our intervention programming at a systems level, that it's standards aligned, that it is, again, equivalent between the K-4 buildings, that our teachers are having great observations and feedback, that our professional development is working, all of those parts. And again, people, again, if you go back to Good to Great, Jim Collins, Who's on Your Bus, recruiting, retaining, training, and building excellent K-12 teams. Right now, there is a shortage of teachers, there's a shortage of administrators across the state, across the nation. I'm sure you've seen all the news stories about how difficult it is to hire employees. Schools are not immune from that by any stretch. And in fact, post-pandemic, we saw a lot of people leave the profession. So making sure that we're getting and retaining outstanding teachers, support staff, administrators is critical towards this mission. And partnering with those outside of the district, community members, business partners, higher education partners, nonprofit partners. Again, this is a substantial problem that we have to solve. We can use all the help that we can get to do it. So that's looking at the systems really broadly. Obviously, there's a lot more details in all of those things. Triaging right now for K-12 is focused on intervention programming at all levels, targeting student supports, again, particularly at the high school level, where we have students who have already gone through a system, they're headed towards graduation and they're struggling. So roles like having an intervention person that Mr. Isselman took at the high school, roles like Mrs. Devlin's academic support position to case manage students who don't have IEPs who are at risk of not graduating, positions like Mr. Ricketts' position, working with career internships to get students job experience. All of those things are targeted student supports to triage for students right now. Again, recruiting, retaining, training, and building intervention teams, people like the positions that I just mentioned who can really work with students who already have missed a window in some cases for their reading and mathematics. And again, partnering with those same groups to help our students be successful. Next slide, Mr. Way. So in terms of getting to these goals, one of the things that became clear to me, and I, again, have reviewed with the board several times, but I think it bears repeating when I was doing my entry plan, was that I heard from people in all different groups, community, school board members, prior superintendents, teachers, support staff, that the trust and the working relationship between the staff and the administration and the board and staff was lacking. And really, in order to get to these triple 100 goals, there's only one way to do it, and that is if we all act as one team, Team Exeter, that we are all committed to the exact same goal, which is all of our students being successful. That's 100% of staff. And as I said at the beginning of this presentation, I have invited both any administrator or any staff member who's comfortable saying that they're okay with students not achieving these goals to seek employment somewhere else. And 100% of the board. Now we have a new board member. Hopefully Mr. Chowdhury will sign on to these goals as well. And then when we see our new board members in December, but for right now, the 9-member board committed to these goals. And we really all have to be focused and on the same team to get this done in every aspect of the organization. And we have to move aggressively right now. The children in these pictures are students who attended our Talents and Tips program this summer. I got to meet many of them, really all of them, I think, by the time the camp was over. They are wonderful children, and they deserve a wonderful future. So sometimes there are changes to schedules, to curricular programs, and as board members, you may have people who in the community who think, oh, this is changing too fast, or this is, it would be nice if we had time to wait for all of the adults to be comfortable with every change and decision that we need to make. But you only get to be a first grader once. You only get to be a kindergartner once. You only get to be a senior once. And so we really have to move with urgency. And that means sometimes the adults are going to have to feel uncomfortable. And that's okay. Because if we wait till everybody's perfectly comfortable, some of these faces will miss their windows to be successful for the remainder of their lives. So in terms of reporting progress metrics, when you think about it at the systems approach, which means a child comes into us as a kindergartner and leaves as a senior, changing the system from a child to get from kindergarten to that end of third grade benchmark for 100% reading, that happens in 2025. Sorry, Joe. Next slide. I'm looking at my slides. Thank you for all of you who noticed that. For a systems approach for math at 7th grade, our current kindergarten class, they get to 7th grade in 2029. So when I talk about sustained focus, math at 7th grade doesn't just happen in 7th grade, right? It's a combination of kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, all of those things. And then for our current kindergarten to be graduating with their cohort, that's 2034. So again, patience, at the same time, urgency, that there's a long horizon, and we have to, as a team, sustain our focus. Because if we lose sight of these goals and we shift to something else, we're not going to attain them. In terms of triaging, because we can't just wait till 2034 for our graduation rate to hit 100. That's not acceptable either. In terms of triaging, we'll look at K-8 fall, winter, and spring district assessment data. So that's the computer adaptive STAR test, that's Spanis and Pinnell benchmark assessment system. That's our own curriculum-based assessments. K-8 PSSA data, 9 to 12 graduation data, so really 12th grade graduation data. 9 to 12 Keystone data, 9 to 12 other assessment data, AP exams, International Baccalaureate, if we would ever go down that route, SAT, ACT, the NOCTI, which is the exam that our BCTC students take for their trades that they're studying, post-secondary data, whether our students are being successful in finding employment, getting admitted to the college of their choice, meeting military requirements, that sort of thing. And then our K-12 special education data, where are we in terms of students who are having IEPs? What percentage of time are they being included in the regular ed setting? And to what extent are they meeting their IEP goals? Next slide, please, Mr. Way. In terms of reporting to the board on our progress monitor throughout the course of this year, again, it is a multi-year endeavor, but in terms of just the year ahead of us, one of the things that we discussed with Mr. Fiedler is combining both just data with actual real-life lived experience in the changes that we're making. So we're starting off this meeting with our Getting 100 presentation. And this is a proposal outline of the plan. It's not written in stone, but to just give the board a sense of where we think we'll go with this. October, at the committee of the whole meeting, the education report, the fall screening data, what we learned during that process, which is happening right now in the buildings. And then a student and staff plans and practice presentation. So as Mr. Fiddler has said many times, he's really interested, as I know many of you are, in hearing from students, also hearing from staff about what does the actual lived experience of these things look like. So at the various committee of the whole meeting where it says student staff plans and practice presentation, at each board meeting, not a dog and pony show of it's your turn, it's April, but really trying to get after what was a student group's experience with a career internship, with a summer program, what's a teacher's experience using a new intervention, new materials, that sort of thing, so that the board has, in a short presentation, the ability to kind of capture that human side of what's really taking place in our classrooms. November, special education data presentation. What's our current reality in special education data? I think that's important to visit. December, looking at the 9 to 12 data, all those different data sets, points that I talked about in the metrics. January, a presentation about where we need to move forward with the senior high. Overall, we made a lot of changes K-8, and we kind of left the senior high somewhat untouched. We did make some changes to credits and those sorts of things, but where we want to go with that. February, where is our winter screening data? So again, in the winter, we will take kind of a temperature of where our students have gone in the fall and have they made the progress that they need to be making towards our targets and goals. So we'll present that to the board in February. March, looking at the implications in the curriculum budget for the 2022-2023 school year, as we learned from this year where we need to move forward with curriculum. In April, looking at the staffing implications. One of the things the board will see in upcoming enrollment reports is we have a significant increase in our elementary enrollment this year. I think that there's some part of that's a combination of parents who held their kids out of kindergarten last year due to the pandemic, but we've actually seen an increase at multiple grade levels, really K4 and even K6. I think in the housing market right now, a lot of Exeter properties are turning over from empty nesters to families with young children. I think that that's likely to proceed. So what are the implications, both in terms of our 100 goal for staffing as well as potentially increasing enrollment? And then in May, what are our plans for summer learning going to look like? And then in June, the final data presentation for our internal data. We won't get PSSAs, keystones, that sort of thing until late in the summer or the following fall. So what does our internal data say about our students' progress? So that concludes my presentation for this evening. So Mr. Fiddler, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Miner. Sobering, bleak, but in the end, some hope. And I think your presentation embodies the Stockdale paradox. We're going to have to stare down these statistics, not just tonight, but every night. Every night we're here through the end of the year. And then guess what? We start all over again next year. If I can share one story, I retired in 2018, came to I guess it was just called a community forum meeting in the fall of 2018. I had time on my hands. I had worked in the evenings for 15 years. I thought, well, I have my evenings free. I'm going to go see what's happening at the school district where I spent my K to 12 years. And we heard numbers very much like the numbers you shared with us tonight. I remember the third grade numbers were just astonishingly low. That was 2018. Those third graders are now in sixth grade. And I can say, based on my initial interest, Dr. Hemberger was an early supporter of mine to run for this seat. Nothing happened until you got here. And so you're absolutely correct. We can't spend our time pointing fingers at the past, but it is just heartbreaking to know that in the face of these numbers, which your predecessor showed on a screen, nothing happened. Because I started attending board meetings in 2019. That never came up. That never came up. So thank you for bringing it up, for holding those numbers up, and we might as well post them on sticky notes on the wall so that we don't forget. We can't forget, because nothing happened with those third graders. They're now in sixth grade. I wonder how they're doing. I feel very badly for them.
Mr. Fiddler, we know the answer. 37% of them are proficient in math. Yeah.
Any other board members have any questions for Dr. Miner?
I do have a question. When you talked about the systems K through 12 and how we're going to improve, one thing that you mentioned was the scheduling. And I know I've noticed there's some concern about what happened with the special schedule in the elementary school. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about that and why we had so many changes there.
Sure. Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. So a couple of things. I think that one of the things in order to really drive achievement that is often overlooked is the importance of time, the importance and value of every minute. You know, we have 180 days with students. And really, when I go in and observe classrooms, I'm looking at time down to the minute from, you know, how many minutes did it take you to get from the carpet to your desk and be ready to learn again, right? Like those things ultimately matter. And so making sure that we had a schedule that reflects our academic priorities, including time to intervene for students, making sure that we had a schedule that allowed grade level teams to plan together so that as teachers have strength in an area of practice or they're learning to use new materials, that they're able to support one another in their planning, and making sure that in all three of the buildings, if you're in third grade, you have the same amount of minutes allotted for math as the other buildings, that there isn't some inherent differences in the amount of time that students have to learn particular materials in each day. So really getting all three buildings consistent on the same page, making sure that they all reflect the priorities so that when they go to Riften, all of our students have had the same quality in terms of their schedule and time, in addition to the same resources, that sort of thing. Some of the things that came up with specials is in a conversation with Tim DeWalt and Melissa Crotty early in my tenure here, was a real concern for the decrease in the number of students who are in Exeter's music programs in the junior high school and the high school. When I was doing my entry plan, one of the things that came up time and again as a strength was music in Exeter, the band in particular, orchestra. Those numbers, and I can't quote them right now, but I'm sure that Ms. Crotty could provide them to Dr. Clam, have dwindled alarmingly. Number of students who are in band, the number of students who are in orchestra, the number of our students who participate in art and take art electives has dwindled significantly. And one of the reasons that they believe that occurred is that several years ago, art teacher and music teacher were removed from K4, and then PE was doubled up as health and PE, and library was doubled up as library and research. So students were missing 15 art and music periods basically every year when that change was made. And so fewer students theoretically became interested in that. One of the things that the state and the federal government, the standards reflect, is the idea of a well-rounded education. Having experience in science and social studies, in art and music, all of those things matter, and ultimately they contribute to reading success and comprehension because they build a schema in terms of a student's experience and background knowledge. And so when we really hacked away at those things, not only did it have serious impacts long-term on our music and art programs, but it deprived our students of some of the background knowledge and schema that they need to be successful readers. It also caused the schedules at each building to really be based around sharing staff between buildings in a midday switch, so teachers didn't have plan time at the same time. And even from a staffing perspective, when we're paying teachers to drive in the middle of the day from building to building, again, we're paying teachers for time that's not directly with students. So one of the changes that we made this year was to have a dedicated art, music, PE, and library teacher at each of the elementary schools. Now that our enrollment is up, it's even more of a necessity, but we felt that it was really important. And in terms of paying for those new positions, each one of those new positions was covered through staff attrition at the junior and senior high school. So people who retired or resigned, that position was not replaced 8 through 12, and then those funds were allocated to increase our special staffing K to 4. So it wasn't an add to the budget. So that now the research that was being taught in library, that's being taught in the library period instead of 2 broken out periods. Same with health and PE. I think that there were some questions at Owatton about the different staffing that are there. Owatton is large enough that one day in a rotating cycle, and again, not a midday switch where you're losing salary and drive time, but a full one day, one of the Jackson Wald specialists rotates over to Owatton to pick up the 5th section of a special. So some students at Owatton may have a Jackson Wald PE teacher or a Jackson Wald librarian, because Jackson Wald's small enough that sharing one day a week with Owatton made that all possible. In the Rifton building, we took the Create special, and again, we pushed those things into library, into our science curriculum, into our art curriculum. And again, they're running the same 4-day schedule at Rifton as they're running at the elementary school. So was that the answer to your question, Ms. Wilson? Okay. Thank you. You're welcome.
So can we assume, Dr. Minor, that we'll also be tracking that to see hopefully those numbers go up? In art
Absolutely.
and music. Okay, great.
Absolutely.
Any other questions from board members?
So, Dr. Minor, I do have a question. When I look at and perhaps you can explain this to us, but the International Baccalaureate program as an example, the acceptance rate at top-notch universities skyrockets for people who have successfully gone through that program. Could you explain what that is?
A little bit. I'm not an expert in international baccalaureate, although in the school that my children went to, they had a hybrid of offering both advanced placement and international baccalaureate. So international baccalaureate functions similarly to advanced placement, where students take an assessment and can earn college credit. As the name implies, it's an international program. The course offerings tend to be a little more, like, I'll give you an example, like, maybe you have like literature in AP, but in international baccalaureate, you might have theater, those sorts of things. So it has a more broad and kind of broad in terms of variety of topics, and then more narrow focus, like something like a subset of ELA, like theater in international baccalaureate. The Downingtown STEM School, which is often called out as being, a super high performer, they run an international baccalaureate program there. It's an intensive process like AP to get teachers certified to do that and to meet all of the qualifications. One of the changes that we made this year is to have Maggie Wright be our supervisor of academic enrichment, to make sure that while we are looking to move to this 100, that our top performing students are continuing to get their needs met, whether it's gifted and talented or challenging courses like AP and IB rather. And so I have asked Maggie Wright to work with Dr. Flam and Mr. Campbell to research AP and IB to look at the top 50 performing high schools in the state. Which programs are they using to speak, with the different curriculum directors in those schools, as well as their relationships with community colleges for dual enrollment, and to come back to our team with different proposals of how we may proceed. So when I talk in this presentation about the senior high school and looking at revitalizing that, an assessment of whether or not we should consider international baccalaureate as a potential offering at the high school will be part of that presentation in January.
Great, thank you. And maybe we can even have an explanation of the board, a more detailed explanation.
Absolutely. When we get to that point, we'll certainly do that.
Thank you. Just a couple more questions. Could you, you had mentioned the enrollment growth. Can you tell us how much enrollment growth we're seeing this year? Because the question that I then have that builds off of that is, with this growth, are the things that you went through today, is that scalable to meet the needs of the growth?
So right now, Dr. Flam and I were discussing this today. The board gets a first day, second day, third day comparison and the end of September comparison. So we will have that to the board shortly from our enrollment and data departments. I can say anecdotally, and again, looking at K4 is when you can really see it happen the most because of the class size changes. We have added 5 staff members strictly for enrollment across the 3 buildings K4 because our classes were in excess of the guidance provided in policy for class size. And right now there are 3 classrooms that are on, or 3 grade levels at buildings that are on the watch list of being precariously close to exceeding those class size guidance. Now, they're not firm limits in our policy, but again, knowing that we have these academic concerns and coming off a pandemic, we certainly don't want to lose sight of student-teacher ratio as part of that. So we'll have those specific numbers for you in terms of the increase, unless we have them right now. Dr. Flam, do you have no? So we'll get them to you. But again, anecdotally, we've had that increase at the elementary level. In terms of scaling this, yes, 100%. All of these things are scalable. I think the biggest challenge is a financial challenge in terms of the implication for staff as the district grows. One of the things that I think is a misconception for people is that when you get new students, it's financially beneficial to a school district because theoretically you get a state subsidy for those students. But the reality is your tax base doesn't grow in proportion to the changes in enrollment unless you have business and other sorts of things. So in the short term, the increase in enrollment and a subsequent increase in staff, I think that's where we'll have to have conversations looking at staffing if that continues about the pressures that puts on the budget, more so than any pressures around just being able to scale the academic programs. Even in the example with Jackson Wald sharing a specialist, the class sizes have increased enough over the summer at some of the buildings now where we're having a class split and go to different specials instead of the whole class going to the special together. So we'll really have to watch that closely in terms of the budgetary implications to maintain our curricular goals with increasing enrollment.
Thank you. Just 2 more things. Could you please absolutely make this presentation or a portion of it part of your coffee and conversation discussions?
Yes.
We've had a lot of difficult conversations in this room and other rooms over the last couple of months, but there is nothing more important than this conversation tonight. And I think anybody at home should watch your presentation and understand where we're going and the kind of commitment that we have to make to the kids in the Exeter School District. So that's why you're here. That's why you were hired. I don't think any of us, at least I couldn't articulate it. I don't have an education background, but something didn't feel right. And hopefully we can get it back on track and have the stick-to-itiveness to stay after it. Thank you.
You're welcome, Mr. Japina. And I absolutely believe that we can do this. That's why we've set the goals the way we have. That's why we reference the Stockdale paradox. It is a troubling place to be at the moment, but I have absolutely no doubt in our ability to make a dramatic turnaround for our students.
Thanks, Mike. Any other questions from the board?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Miner. Even though it's my first day on the job and I'm only here for 3 months, I'm totally committed to what you just presented with. So thank you for that. My question was, is there an example of a district that was in a similar situation as Exeter, but was able to pull out of it and reach the goals that you suggested by the timeline you suggested?
Well, that is an excellent question. I, at the top of my head, can't speak to a specific district. I could certainly research that. But I can share that this is a personal passion of mine, and these systems and processes, during the time when I was an elementary principal, our scores rose steadily, and you can go back and there's there's a website called schooldigger.com that traces PSSA data in particular. And over the course of those 5 years, our elementary school, rose to 4th in the state in PSSA achievement. Our 4th graders were 100% proficient in math, science, and I think 98% proficient in ELA by 4th grade. So I have done this work personally before in terms of dramatically increasing achievement. And then that was sustained for about 10 years after I left, that the school stayed in the top 10 because of building a systems approach to that data. So I can at least share that from a personal level. It is a challenge. One of the things that you typically see is if you plot free and reduced lunch poverty against academic achievement, it's pretty much straight diagonal where schools fall based on their demographics. So if you look at the top 50 schools, most of them are also the wealthiest school districts. Parents pay for tutors, parents are highly educated, those sorts of factors. But there are some school districts that are outliers to that, where they have students who are achieving well beyond their demographics. So those are the schools that you always want to look at and pay attention to, that they're achieving beyond their demographics. So it's absolutely doable, but it really, like I said, it takes a systems approach. It takes sustained effort to do it. And over time, as we start to research other schools' success, particularly at the high school level, we'll certainly bring that back to the board, the information about individual schools that we're looking at closely.
Thanks, Tony. Anybody else? A question? Great. Thank you again, Dr. Miner.
Very
Excellent
welcome.
report. We now move to the second item, which is some exciting news about one of our elementary physical education teachers, and I will turn that over to Dr. Flam, if I may.
Thank you, Mr. Fiddler. It is my pleasure to share with the board and our community that Mrs. Jennifer Dorda has been chosen as the 2021 SHAPE PA Elementary Physical Education Teacher of the Year. SHAPE stands for the Society of Health and Physical Educators. And Mrs. Dorda has been the physical education teacher at Rifton School for the past 16 years. She is extremely positive, enthusiastic, and creative, and we're very happy and excited for Mrs. Dorda that she's been recognized. She will be honored at the Teacher of the Year Award celebration at Seven Springs Resort in November. And she continues to do a wonderful job with our 5th and 6th grade students. So congratulations to Mrs. Dorda. We're very proud of her.
Thanks, Dr. Flam. Perhaps we could have Mrs. Dorda here at a meeting sometime in the future to talk a little bit more about what she does to deserve these kinds of accolades. So thank you very much for the report. The next item is something I think we can carry over to the voting meeting in 2 weeks. It's simply a recommendation that we approve early graduation for it's about a half a dozen students. Mrs. Wilson, is there nothing else I have to do with that item? And the final item on the education agenda tonight is to hear from Mrs. Harris on our COVID-19 dashboard. Mrs. Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Fiddler. Mr. Way, if you can put the dashboard up on the screen for us, please. So while we are heavily focused on teaching and learning, we do accept the reality that we are still dealing with a pandemic. And so we are mindful of the health and safety of our students and our staff and our community, and thus wanted to be able to present a dashboard to the community again this year to keep them up to date regarding what's happening in our schools as it relates to COVID. So I'm going to walk you through the different parts of the dashboard, and then I'm also going to talk to you just a little bit about something that has changed significantly since we last met, which is the order from the Department of Health regarding the face covering mandate. So first, to the dashboard, you'll see that we have a grid there with each of our school buildings indicated on the grid, and a column for confirmed cases and a column for status. So we'll be updating this table on a weekly basis with the number of confirmed cases for the week for each building, And then the status section will indicate whether or not that building is open or whether or not we had to take action and move that building into virtual learning for any period of time. Mr. Way, if you can scroll down to reporting criteria. Thank you. So what are we reporting on this table to you and to the community? We're reporting confirmed cases that are reported to the district, and these are confirmed cases of students or staff who were in a school building or participating in a school-sponsored activity during their contagious period. And to refresh your memory just a little bit from last year, contagious period means 48 hours prior to symptom onset. That also means 48 hours prior to having a positive COVID test result if the individual was asymptomatic. So we'll be counting folks in this count based on that date of symptom onset or date of test if they are asymptomatic. Staff members who work in multiple buildings will only be reported to one building, same as we did last year for reporting purposes. And students and staff who are virtual will only be counted on the table if they participated in athletics or extracurricular activities during the time that they were in that contagious period. Mr. Way, if you could scroll down a little bit more to see the counting criteria. Thank you. So under counting criteria, we just a little bit more closely refined what the reporting criteria are to make it a little bit clearer. Defining what a case means when we talk about a confirmed case. That's a positive test result that's been reported to us either by a staff member or by a family on behalf of a student. In some rare instances, DOH may report a case to us, but I can only recall one of those from last year. So in most instances, it's a family reporting a positive test result or a staff member reporting a positive test result. And again, a confirmed case is one that has a positive test result attached to it. Last year, you heard us talk a little about probable cases as well. DOH is not focused on probable cases this year in their guidance. They are focused on confirmed cases. So I'll take you back to our presentation from last meeting when we talked about definition of outbreak. And in those definitions, they use the language confirmed cases, not confirmed and probables. That is also how the Pennsylvania Department of Health calculates its incidence rate for the county based on confirmed cases. So there's some graphics there to help you understand even more who's counted and who's not, but it's the same information. And then Mr. Way, if you could scroll a little further to the quick links section, thank you. Here we've linked resources for everyone, including our health and safety plan, our FAQs related to COVID, and our health and safety plan. The link to the list of members of the pandemic task force for Exeter. A link to that order that I referenced a little bit ago regarding face coverings in schools and FAQs from the Pennsylvania Department of Education regarding that face covering order. We've also linked their PA COVID-19 data and information on vaccines. And you'll see there's a box there to the left. It's currently red, and that's where we will update on a weekly basis our county incidence and transmission rate. It's currently high. And below that, we have a few definitions. These were terms that we used a lot last year and will continue to use this year that we sometimes got questions about, like what exactly does that mean in terms of contagious period and close contacts and those types of things. So we put those definitions up here for ease of use for everyone. And Mr. Way, if you can keep scrolling. And then some of this data should look familiar from last year as well. We're continuing to put on our dashboard actual zip code data in relation to incidence rate and positivity rate for COVID. This information we continue to pull from Mainline Mama. That continues to be the main source of that information, as DOH does not have it broken down by zip code in this manner. And then, Mr. Way, you can just scroll to the rest to see the rest of the Mainline Mama data. And then if you could scroll back up, Mr. Way, I do want to just talk quickly about the significant change from last week. On Tuesday, the Pennsylvania Department of Health issued a face covering order for schools. And that order essentially indicates that all students and staff and visitors in the building must wear a face covering at all times. That order is in place until such time that the Pennsylvania Department of Health removes that order. Of interest related to that order, if you recall, our past experience has been that when orders and mandates come out, following that a few days later, we'll get frequently asked questions and updated guidance from either PDE or the Department of Health. We did get some updated guidance from the Pennsylvania Department of Education and frequently asked questions, and they're posted there as well. But of interest in there is some very firm language that they are using regarding the district's responsibility to enforce that face covering mandate. And the language, if you don't mind me reading for a minute, is so specific that it says school officials who fail to adhere to the order could lose the protection of sovereign immunity and may personally face lawsuits from those who may be affected by any official's attempt to ignore the order. Failing to implement or follow the control measures may expose individuals to personal liability related to willful misconduct. And in those FAQs, it also encourages districts to follow their in-house procedures related to willful misconduct as it relates to staff who are unwilling to follow the order and students who are unwilling to follow the order. So I wanted to share that information because I know there have been some questions around the new face covering mandate, and I thought it was important for everyone to kind of know the clarification and the guidance that we've been receiving to date. Any questions about, I was going to say, any questions about the order or the dashboard?
Mrs. Harris, first of all, great job with this. This is excellent work. Question for you. Upon, let's say there are some cases that occur, I noticed that recently in Boyertown, there's like about 100 kids or something.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a contingency plan at all for that type of incident if it does occur?
In terms of teaching and learning, you mean?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So Dr. Miner and Dr. Flam and the principals will work together to develop a plan that we will utilize in those situations when we need to move to full virtual learning. I imagine it will look very much like it did last year in terms of
Yes.
provisions for that virtual learning.
Absolutely. So in the event that we would have a closure like Boyertown, the state's indicating that they're pretty much 14-day closures. So the plan is that we would revert to, if we had to have a closure of an individual building, the full virtual system that we used last year. Students already have one-to-one Chromebooks in the majority of grades. Those grades that do not, we would distribute iPads or Chromebooks to students, and then the regular daily schedule would be followed, teachers, students, etc., because everybody theoretically, not theoretically, would be in fact quarantined if DOH ordered that. So in the event of a full building closure, that's what would happen. And I think what Ms. Harris was referencing is that in the case of an individual student quarantine, in those cases, we'll be working with families, with guidance counselor, principal, classroom teacher, on an educational plan that is most suitable for that child. We have some students who do very well with independent work. We have some students who you can send projects home. We have other students who their families really struggle to support them. So we think that it's prudent at this stage of the pandemic to really try to work with families, knowing that child, knowing the teacher, on the best individual plan. But in the event of a widespread closure, we would revert to a full virtual platform.
Thank you.
But I think it's safe to say that the intent here is to try to follow as many of the things that we have in place so we can stay in person. I mean, that's really
Absolutely.
what is driving what we're trying to do here.
Without a question, yes.
Other questions? Thank you, Mrs. Harris.
You're welcome.
And that concludes the education agenda.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fiddler. Okay, moving on then to athletics and extracurricular activities. Dr. Herring.
Yes, we we have on the agenda a quote regarding the varsity baseball foul ball fencing protection. And I was hoping that Mr. Legaff can make some comments about it. Now, is this something we're gonna vote at the next meeting to approve?
Yes,
Okay.
I can speak a little bit about this, and Mr. Fike hopefully can help me out with some information I don't know. So about 3-4 years ago, when we had drainage put in the field, the backstop, which was a clamshell, had to be removed for the drainage to go in. When that clamshell was removed, we then needed something as a backstop. And with going over with our varsity baseball coach, putting back a clamshell takes away the game of baseball. So we worked with a company to putting a netting system in, just putting something in, thinking it would work. And we came to find out that it didn't work in terms of blocking foul balls from going in one neighbor's property consistently. Made some remedies here for practices, other things we do, but for varsity baseball games in the spring, the netting system that we have currently is not blocking foul balls from going in one neighbor's yard primarily. They are going in others somewhat, but primarily it's one. So Mr. Fike reached out to an engineer to look at where basically our home plate sits on our varsity baseball field, and then the trajectory of where these foul balls go are going. They saw as well that it goes to this one neighbor's property. So the engineer recommended a company to put in a netting system, which also has a construction company tied to it, to install a netting system. And what I'll cut to the chase of this is currently we have a 30-foot netting system that is not working. This new system would be 60 feet to hopefully stop foul balls from going into the street or on the right side, which is the first base side dugout of foul balls. Mr. Fike, if there's anything
Yeah, is Joe back there? I just sent him something. If he can put that on the screen. To put this in perspective, the last baseball game of last year, 7 foul balls ended up on this property's roof, in the yard, hit his dog, broke a hole in the fence. So this is where we're talking the trajectory. Right now, I think it's 28 or 28 feet high. The fence, 52 is the size of the fence that would stop balls from going across the street. They might go straight up and down. They could bounce, but they're not going to land in that property. What happened is, from the research I looked at, we used to have a clamshell, which is basically going over home base. But for way baseball's played, if you have a clamshell, you don't catch foul balls because they hit the fence and they stop right there. So all the new fields basically have a backstop that balls can go up, the catchers can catch them, the foul balls are in play. But when we took that out, we basically opened up an area directly to the opposite side where the balls are going. And this was the engineer's projection of where the ball should go in a normal foul, and you can see where they are going. And like I said, just that one property had 7 balls in there on their house and through the fence, actually punched a hole through the fence. So we're going to replace that fence, that section of fence, and hit their dog. And this was going on for several years, and the neighbors really just started getting tired of it.
And back in the mid-90s, when the field there on your screen, home plate was in left field, hitting out, there was no issues. But sometime in the mid-2000s, which with some I believe, high school renovations and additions, the field was switched to its current status. And after a lot of research and asking questions of multiple people over the years, it was told that when this went in, the clamshell was not in, and the same foul balls were going in the same yard. And that's where years ago, in about 2008, the clamshell was installed to stop any ball that's hit from going anywhere.
When was the clamshell removed most recently?
About 4 years ago when we had the drainage put in for the high school baseball field.
So during the time when the clamshell was in, there were no issues at all with foul balls going into the neighbor's yard.
That's correct.
Do we still have that clamshell?
No, that was it was barely holding up as is.
And what we did this past season is we got a movable clamshell, which we used for practice. The only time the clamshell was taken out was during games. So, you know, they can compete and catch foul balls. But during practice, the clamshell was in there the whole time. Because otherwise we'd have the neighbors pounded, 5-6 days a week instead of once a week for a game.
We had 2 staff workers put in front of their house in the street on the sidewalk to try to prevent, the balls from coming, but sometimes they were over the head, hitting the roof of the house, into the fence, which Mr.
Onto the
Flake
front
said,
porch.
on the front porch.
And the movable clamshell prevents it from happening.
Right, during practice.
During
But
practice.
that's not realistic you can't use that for a varsity baseball game.
So if I can just add, I live in that general neighborhood. I will tell you that, that house gets hit a lot, but the other houses get hit as well. This fella's dog eats the balls when they come into the yard before he can get to them if he knows they're there. But his biggest concern that he expressed to me was there are a lot of kids who come to the games who chase the balls out into the street. And that is a really bad intersection on a good day. There's no stop sign there at the corner. And it's just unsafe to have those balls flying into that intersection beyond the property damage and that kind of stuff. All that stuff can be repaired. I know this guy had his windshield broken over the summer. But with those balls coming off the field like that, I'm afraid a kid's going to run out there and get creamed by a car. Or something's going to happen. So there has to be some sort of solution.
And the solution is basically 12 foot down in the ground, so 70-foot poles, almost 58 feet above. But the netting is similar to what you see at the Major League games that they put behind home plate to keep balls from hitting the fans.
And what you also will see is, try to explain this today in an email, but if you're on the pitcher's mound and you're looking at the right side of which would be the third base dugout, and starting there where that tree is in the middle and going all the way over to your left to where the first base dugout is where the netting would be. What's happening now is where that white arrow is going out, there's no current netting there. There's just an opening. And that's where the balls are going.
Do any other schools use the clamshell?
Mrs. Wilson would probably be able, I don't get to a lot of away games.
You want to play because it takes the defense out of the game.
I will say that in talking in a conference call I had today at 4:30 with this specialty equipment group, they told me that this is a very, very not normal field. And I said, I know, And I think what comes into play with it is the retaining wall in the back that goes up about 8 feet. And most fields, I can tell you for certain, do not have a retaining wall behind where that's the brick behind home plate. I don't know of any field that there's a retaining wall in at least Berks County.
Is the netting the only recommendation that the engineer made? Were there any other suggestions, or that was the top one?
They thought that would be the best, because if you try to put up a steel fence or, you know, a mesh fence, it's so high that it'll probably get knocked over during storms, where the netting's more pliable, that the wind can come through. I think this actually can be brought down off season. Am I right?
I'm not sure.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And the other problem is with fencing, with all these trees there, unless you cut the trees down, which you don't want to do there, you know, the tree falls against steel, the whole thing goes down.
I was going to say too, we have the clamshell at the junior high field. You might want to ask the coaches. The clamshell does not stop all foul balls, because if you think about that woods down there, so many balls go into that woods. I think in regards to this particular house, the clamshell helped close to that area, but the outside houses still can get foul balls. They don't stop all foul balls.
And I think, Mrs. Wilson, to your point, because I've looked at this a lot, is that on the varsity baseball field where home plate, how far home plate sits up, where they positioned the clamshell was like right behind home plate. And on the JV baseball field, where home plate sits there, they put the clamshell back farther. So then when foul balls were hit on the JV baseball field, they're going over, because it's not right on top of home plate, where that's where the varsity clamshell was before. Correct.
Tom, I don't know if you remember this, but when, I'm sure you remember it, but I don't know if you remember the number. When we had talked about replacing the backstop as a part of the project to fix some of the runoff problems that we were having on the field, I recall that the number was like $40,000. That's my recollection. I'm sure it's in email somewhere, but the actual cost difference between what we're looking at now and what we were looking at the time wasn't very significant.
I believe you're correct.
Since you're here, Tom, I know it was, a couple of years ago when we made the decision, but it seems to me that drainage project that we undertook worked pretty darn well. Is that a fair assessment?
It's been fantastic for us. Yes.
So I'm assuming their main reason is because of liability and long-term liability on this. Has this been covered under our insurance? Most of these particular cases, is it?
Everything so far has been under our deductible.
Okay. Gotcha.
But as Mr. Jupina said, kids run down.
It's about safety too. Okay.
It's about safety too.
Understood.
I just texted Mr. Freeze, the coach. He said no other baseball fields in Berks County have the clamshell.
Any other questions? Thank you, Tom. I appreciate that. And that's everything.
Okay, Mr. Aarons, Finance, Facilities, and Audit.
So the first one, we'll do the fun stuff first. Ben, do you want to just stand up real quick? So we want to offer our congratulations to you on earning the PASBO Certificate of Enhanced Qualifications in Transportation. And I think this is I want to say the second board meeting that you've been in where you've been the transportation director. So I wanted to say congratulations. And I haven't heard any complaints about any of the buses at the beginning of the year. I don't know if there have been any, but that's a good sign. So congratulations. Thank you. We're very proud to have you. It's a very festive tie as well. I appreciate that. So the second item on the agenda that we have is a draft letter resolution. I reviewed the resolution, and the only thing that I wanted to ask for clarification on is with the job creation requirement that we had discussed previously. It was a 5 full-time equivalent goal. So 5 full-time or equivalent to 5 full-time. The way that the resolution reads now, it looks like it's 5 full-time or 15 part-time as an either or. So I just wanted to try and get clarification on that and whether that needed to be revised moving forward to a vote next meeting. And then if anybody else has any questions, this would be the time.
I think one of the things, if I remember right, talking to Sharon, you'd have to define what a full-time equivalent was. It'd be easier to say the number of part-time, because if you're talking 40 hours per week, or you're talking allowing 5 hours per week as part-time, and so I think it really comes down to is how many part-time do you want to allow, instead of trying to fight what a full-time equivalent is. Certain places is 30 hours a week is full-time, other places 40 hours a week full-time.
Yeah, and I think in addition to that too, the way that the resolution reads to me is you could hire 5 or 4 full-time employees and not qualify even with 10 part-time employees. And that was probably the larger part of my concern, is that there's this standard that may not be workable for a lot of companies that are going to come in.
Right. Okay. So you could probably put something in there that each full-time employee is equal to 3 part-time.
Yeah.
Sean, would you have some wording for that, or?
I'm sure we could make that work somehow in that regard. I mean, to me, that's what it would be. It would be, if you're proposing.
Right, either 5 or 15, or a combination of both, which would be.
Yeah, you would have to define that it was on the scale that you're asking for. That it's 3 part-time equals 1 full-time. 5 or 15, the equivalent.
That's the problem. Where it's going to be trying to track that if. We were just trying to make it as simple as possible, if full-time or part-time, or
Yeah, I see the current language is a little problematic because, in theory you could have 3 new full-time positions and 5 new part-time positions. And how do you, and if it doesn't meet this standard that way, they're not going to be able to, get the LERTA.
Right.
So I think, having some kind of a total that makes sense, that total, employment positions makes sense, but it's got to be a little bit better crafted, I think.
You're talking more of a combination then. It's 5 or 15 or some combination thereof.
Yeah, combined.
Equal to that.
Because right now it's either or. You got 5
Right.
full-time or 15 part-time. It doesn't really give you any combination or any total.
I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying. I read the language. It's the way it's written could be viewed as being inflexible. It has to be one or the other, and there's no in between.
I think the other designation is probably like whether it's a salary versus an hourly employee too as well. So that's the other kind of factor involved in that that process. Because if you have a salary employee, it doesn't matter how many hours they do. They're just their salary. They get paid whatever rate it is. Versus an hourly employee, which every hour is counted. So whatever that equivalence of that scale is what it should be. But I have a little question here. So the other thing I know that I saw this is 7 years. That's what you put as the schedule for this, which is I think that's what we agreed upon versus the 10. I didn't get a chance to read through it, but is there anything where someone could be grandfathered into this provision at all? Like, for example, if somebody buys that business, will they still get the same provision, or will it restart?
I think the first thing is they have to make application. We have to come, if we decide to pass a resolution, then I have to come up with an application that we'll post on our website, and each individual application is going to be looked at. I don't think it goes backwards. It only goes, at time of purchase, whether they're asking for, or at time of application to the township for the building permit and the improvements is when it could take effect. We would not go backwards. Someone had already started a project or already got the building permit or bought the property with intent to build without having made the application to us.
So we did pick the selective, or we have to be the one to select the particular provision. I didn't get a chance to read it, but yeah.
And from what I talking to Sharon, she talked to the township. Right now, there are no applications in the township. There might be, but the township doesn't know any that are pending right now.
Okay, understood.
I still would like to do a little research on what the LERTA has attracted at the township level. Hamid, a few months ago, when he purchased his land up on the corner by the old sheets, he had a post on Facebook, and it was, "What do you want to see in our community?" And so many people put things for activities, some sort of activity to do, or make a higher end store or restaurant. That's what our community was looking for. And I'm not sure that this LERTA attracts that. I really I want to look, but I'm not sure that that's what it's attracting. When we looked at the examples given to us of was it Burn Bethel Township, or
Burn was actually Onalani Township.
Okay.
Burn.
Like they're putting in warehouses, and I'm not sure if warehouses is what's best for our community. So I'm going to be looking in the next 2 weeks. I really want to see what the LERTAs have attracted. I know that Dr. Hamburger talked about Wilson and all the things that they had, but they don't have a LERTA. That's not what is attracting those businesses to that area. And I think we need to do what attracts businesses, which is our job, is to have the best school district that we can have. And I think that's our role.
I don't disagree with that statement, Allison, but I guess my question would be, couldn't this have been something that would have enticed someone to buy that Sheets property and then turn it into what he's turning it into? Like, they could have applied for it for this as long as they met these standards. So they could do it for something small that's for the community as well. I mean, my concern is definitely the warehouses too, don't get me wrong. But my hope would be that we would attract the people that would do things like Hamid is looking to do on that Sheets property in Exeter and do more things for families.
No, I think we would be blessed for companies like Godiva to do large expansions, or Boscov's to do large expansions, and I think that's something that we want to look at. And I mean, land use is not what the school district is in the business of doing. That's something that the township is doing, but this is just a tool to assist in that process, especially as we are the primary taxing authority in a locality. So I think that, we want to try and give ourselves as much favors as we can when we're looking to attract those businesses. Because I agree, like, I'd rather Reading Rocks move to Exeter Township and that's the first property that gets alerted. Like, that'd be awesome. Probably not going to happen. And there are reasons for that, and they're myriad, but I certainly think that this is a step in the right direction for the community. I know that the township talked about this before with us, and that they're making a priority out of economic development and really moving in that direction, and working with Simona Collins, which is the township planner, to try and develop plans around some of that stuff and changing the zoning so that we're making sure that we're really marketing ourselves in the best way possible. So I think, the best way to get what we're all kind of hoping happens around Exeter is really to, encourage business development rather than try and pick and choose what we can see now rather than what we can't see.
So perhaps this is a silly question, but could we eliminate that concern by saying we want no less than this many employees, but we don't want more than this many employees. Because if you think of a warehouse, they're going to have a lot more than 5 employees. So by doing, maybe that's a silly idea. I don't know. Just throwing my thoughts out there.
Well, I think that I'm not sure if that would be a legal issue, but I think, let's say we did do that. I think part of the main reason we want to do this is because we want to have our community be more affluent and have a larger business development community to support the district. And the number one, thing that I would look to see in some of these plans is how many jobs are they going to create. And let's say, Godiva did a $1 million expansion or something because people like chocolate more than they ever have before. I don't know if that's true. I'm just giving an example. And they create 20 full-time positions. Like, that's a great thing for our community. And those are jobs that people can move into Exeter Township or some of the surrounding suburban areas with. And that's more tax revenue for the district. And, also good that we have that company around here. Same is true of Boscov's. Same is true, if they wanted to do, I don't know if you could do this per zoning, but you did second floors on some of the properties in the Commons area. I think those would all be good things that we would want to encourage.
Are we going to put this up for vote, or are we going to still kind of linger on this for a little
Well,
bit?
if we have enough to move this on to the voting, we'll have to make that decision. If we have enough people that want to move it forward, it would be on this resolution would be on the September voting meeting.
Okay.
Or we could just, keep it in on the cow and say, okay, we'll talk about it again next month. I mean, I think that's what Brian said. There's no pending LERTAs right now within the township. Nobody's currently looking to do a LERTA.
If there is a LERTA that comes up, let's say the township does come up with one like in September. I mean, it does take time for them to even get the grants or the zoning privileges and things of that nature. So I guess we do have time to kind of even judge it as we go along, which it sounds like that's what maybe we should do, because it is a case-by-case basis anyway. That's what it seems to be.
Well, the largest impediment to business development is the time that you get from idea all the way to breaking ground. And when governments are involved, especially in this way where we're trying to incentivize development and you have to go through an application process and you have to get zoning approval, those processes of complexity and, being unsure about it are one of the primary reasons that companies decide not to invest, because there's less guarantees and time is money. And especially if you want to go and build a new facility, or if you want to move into a new facility in 2 years, and it's going to take 3 years because all of your land approvals and everything is delayed around those things, that's additional time. So to some degree, I don't disagree, but if we just set in this mentality of like, well, we can do this another time when something comes up and is obvious and we're like, ooh, we want to jump on that. That's kind of defeating the purpose of encouraging that business development.
We're going to be doing that anyway, sounds like to me. Either way, we're still going to have to judge that business on a case-by-case basis. Anyway,
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So that's the part that I agree with you, but to say that we're just going to adopt the policy later so that then they can apply later and then they can have a hearing later on top of all the other approvals that they have to do with the township, with the county, with the conservation district, even with the state, depending on the size of the project. That's where the complexity starts.
I'll tell you how I feel about it. I mean, I don't know whether, I think not having it in place, we don't know whether it's going to have a positive impact or not. We don't even know whether somebody would be attracted to it. We don't know whether there would be any value if we don't try it. And I think like anything else, if we would initiate it and do it for a period of time and are dissatisfied in some manner, I don't think there's anything preventing us from eliminating the program. But if we don't do it at all, then we never have any sense of whether or not it's of value. And we just continue to sit around and sort of debate whether or not we should do it. My way of thinking, it makes sense to do it, give it a chance, see if it attracts, and look at the outcome, judge the outcome based upon the performance of the LERTA. If it doesn't do anything, or if it is a negative detriment in some manner, then I think we can make a choice at that time to say no further LERTers. So, my way of looking at it.
Well, yeah, I agree with you, Dr. Hamburger. Maybe you should, you got to be able to catch some fish, see if you can put the bait out and find what happens. So, I mean, to me, I don't have a problem with that part of it because it's kind of just sitting there, So, and it is a case by case. So, I agree. All right.
I feel like we've been talking about this for months now. and I feel like I think we're at a point that we should move it forward to put it towards us to make a decision at this point. That's my opinion.
I agree with that too.
I agree. Are you guys okay with a change that allows there to be a rolling between that to get to that 5 full-time equivalent? So if it's 4 positions and then 3 part-time positions, or something. Yeah. So full-time. I said that really wrong. Yeah. What Brian's saying.
Yes.
I don't have a problem with it.
You're good. Okay. The box truck with liftgate purchases. Now, my understanding is that this is for the band as they travel with equipment. Is that correct?
No. The band is the only one that has a box truck with liftgate. What I found out this summer, every time we want to move something between buildings, we either have pickup trucks or trailers or a dump truck. We have nothing enclosed, so we have to wait for sunny days to move things between buildings. This summer, I think we moved 24 pallets of books. Talking to Tom Legaff, we actually have this year to be replaced a utility truck replacement at the high school. Right now it's sitting down in the parking lot because it won't pass inspection. It's rusted through. He asked if we can get a box truck with a liftgate. Box truck is basically a small truck. The liftgate is so we can bring up pallets onto it because I think 3 of our buildings do not have loading docks. The others do. Most of the stuff that we move back and forth with pallets, we hired a moving company this summer because we just didn't have the time to move 7 or 8 teachers between buildings. Like I said, we have 20-some pallets of books. Tom said he could also use it for the football team. I don't know how they transport all their equipment to games. The band brings their own box truck with all their equipment, but we use pickup trucks for the band or for the football or what, Tom? On a bus. But I think it would make a lot more sense. We can move things during rainy days instead of having to just wait for sunny days.
So,
but we're probably talking about $20,000 more in the budget. I do have some areas I can move it from because I didn't spend as much on cement work and things in the capital budget. So, but before I even go look at what the cost was, availabilities, I wanted to bring this up for discussion to see if there's a consensus for me to go check what's on the state contracts and bring it back to the board next month for purchase.
Yeah, that was going to be my follow-up question. I'm okay with moving forward at this stage. I'm a little bit skeptical that this is a use, especially if we're doing a lot of work in the summer. I guess, why couldn't we use the marching band vehicle? I mean, is it full during the summer when it's all stored? I can't imagine that the drums are really good if they're stored in the vehicle.
Tom, do you want to talk to that? I don't think it has lift jack, but it is a box truck.
Yeah, it's something we didn't even look into. I know sometimes it was having trouble starting a lot. There was a lot of money that I believe that was put into it with that, but never even looked to use that in the past.
I'm actually pretty sure it doesn't have a lift gate because they tow a trailer behind it.
Oh, yeah.
Correct.
You're correct.
Yeah, and I think it does belong specifically to the band. I'm not sure if it's they bought it outright. The EMA owns
I
that
think we
van.
just insure it. I don't know. All right.
Would this be a brand new truck or a used truck?
It'd be a brand new truck. I'd look. There's several state contracts we can buy them off of, but I didn't want to look into it before I even talked to the board to see if they, instead of replacing the utility truck, to replace that with a box truck.
I don't know how often you're going to use it, but I know at the hospital when we need them, we rent them from Penske.
Well, and I'm wondering why we can't put a cage on top of any of our pickup trucks.
We could probably do that, but we still don't have the ability to. Our pickup trucks won't hold a pallet. The only thing that will hold a pallet is the dump truck, and we have 3 buildings that do not have loading docks.
Are we moving furniture with this? Or are they boxes?
We're moving boxes, we're moving furniture, we're moving file cabinets. Today I had a bunch of chairs brought over for the overflow area from the schools. This summer we had a lot of things moved between schools, from desks to tables to whatever, because everything was set up for the pandemic. Now we're back to normal classrooms, so everything had to be brought back to those areas. We use vans to move food back and forth. When we run out of food in one school, we send a van over to pick up another, take out back seat if we need room. But vans do not hold pallets of things.
So let me ask you this question, and I don't mean for this to be damning in terms of if you say one thing, it's like, absolutely not, we're not getting this. But can we continue to operate without this? And what is really the downside to doing it that way?
We can operate without it. Things get slowed down. We have to wait for sunny days. Our grounds people are usually out working in the grounds, but this summer, a lot of things I moved. I got complaints because the hockey fields were 2 inches too high. Well, I'm sorry, I need to get school ready, and I need to get the teachers moved to one school. I need to get books over. Those types of things. I'm pulling the people off of grounds on a sunny day when they could have been doing something on a rainy day, but we have nothing covered to move those things. It's on a rainy day.
All right. We could also maybe look to maybe some donations or something. I don't know how we can work that out, but my thing is, I think maybe there's a way to kind of set up a little provision of maybe renting the vehicle or something at certain times when we need it during the summer, doing type of things. Or hey, you know what? We're planning on doing this on Monday. I'll go get a Penske. We have a standing contract with them. They'll give us some, whatever rate or whatever it is, and we could just have them do it that way.
Yeah, we can do that.
I think at this point, my recommendation would be, Brian, to pull quotes and then look at some of these other options, and let's make a more informed decision at that point.
All right, and then what I'll also do is get the quotes for the utility truck replacement and see what the actual cost difference will be.
Okay.
We're not going to move that forward at this time then.
Well, I'm not even sure that other than an endorsement from the board, Brian, I don't think you would need anything voted on with this.
No, I just wanted to see, you know me, I don't like to do work unless
Yeah.
we're moving forward or there's possibility of moving it forward.
Well, would you have a dealership around here that you normally work with that you would expect that they would do
I
it?
normally go to state contracts, and most of the trucks are out of Lancaster or those places that bid on the state contracts. But see what's available and what the cost of the utility truck replacement would be. And I wasn't planning for the utility truck replacement until the winter, but I'm starting to look at that. And it's talking to Tom. It's like, why don't we look at a box truck instead? Let's see what the cost difference would be.
So just so we all understand this would be a replacement for a fleet vehicle, not
Right.
in addition to the fleet.
Right. I'm guessing it's going to be more expensive than the utility truck replacement, because the utility truck replacement is a pickup truck with a box on the back for your tools and everything else. You walk in the back.
The only other thing.
No, I have a question for this facilities committee. I wasn't sure when would be the appropriate time for me to ask it. No, I wondered if there was a quick update on the bus barn.
Go ahead, Mr. Hunter.
You literally read my mind. You literally read my mind. So we have bid openings on our RFP on the 17th of September. Is that right, Brian?
Right.
So the 17th of September, we'll formally open any. I guess they're not actually bids; they're proposals. But we'll
They actually are bids. We didn't. We went
okay.
out for a full bid. So it's general contractor, electrical, HVAC, and mechanical. And in that, there's also the option or alternative bids, I think, for a different type of lift, and also putting the conduit in for future electric charging stations, or at least having the conduit out to certain bus areas.
Yeah. So the first available time that we would be able to consider that, I believe, is the 22nd of September to make a vote on that. And we'll, of course, I think for this situation specifically want to do some more discussion, because there are going to be, and Brian, correct me if I'm wrong here, there are going to be options that we need to decide from that bidders may bid on for some of those alternatives that we'll need to decide, are we going to accept the alternative, or are we going to accept the base? And then at that point, it's really deciding who's the lowest responsible bidder. Or are we not going to do the project and reject those?
Now, one thing I do want to say, at the pre-bid meeting, we had, I think it was 12 general contractors. I think it was 8 or 10 electricians, 6 or 7 mechanical, and the same with the HVAC. So we really had a good turnout. So, I was really surprised.
And in the case of this
because
pre-bid
it's
meeting,
a small project, but I guess people are looking for small projects.
yeah. In the case of this pre-bid meeting, they needed to attend the pre-bid meeting in order to bid. Is that correct?
They were recommended. It wasn't
okay.
mandatory.
It wasn't a requirement. All right.
They were recommended. One thing we did find, and we verified this with the manufacturers, the steel buildings were doing what they call, I think it's 25-foot squares. It's a standard steel building. But if you order right now, if you ordered or signed the contract in October, the building wouldn't get here to March. There's some lead time issues there. So
that's one of the things that we would have to weigh if we decided not to do it in September. And I'm guessing that all these bids are good for 60 days.
Yeah.
So we could go until October.
You could go. You could also do a special voting meeting for the
Yeah.
October committee of the whole.
Yeah.
I know my plan is to review with the architects and engineers every bid that Friday and try to get something out to you that Friday night, so you have something to look at. But I just wanted to let you know that the bid opening's on the 17th.
I think there may be value in even doing an informational presentation, whether we want to post that, to the board or on YouTube or something along those lines, because I think that there is value in making a decision as soon as possible because we want to keep this going and we want to get this in place as soon as possible because we do have a situation with the roof right now that's not sustainable. With that being said, I understand that this is a significant commitment of taxpayer dollars, and we want to take that really seriously. So preparing ourselves to try and understand where, we are right now would be a good use of your time over the next week and a half when we get ready for that information. But if there's anything that the administration can do to provide us, that information Friday night or other formats on Monday evening or something along those lines, so we can come in having been able to digest some of this in a more informed way. Because not all of us are going to be familiar with being able to read through that. I think it's like 60 pages or something like that.
Which book? There's
the bid. Okay, yeah. So being able to digest that down so that we really understand what the decision points are, so we can really have the best opportunity to make a decision at that Tuesday night meeting.
One other answer, other parts of the question. The MPDS permit doesn't seem like there's going to be a problem with the county or the state. The township has already moved us forward as long as we get the MPDS permit, so there's nothing else holding us back. There's one of the alternatives is three-phase power going there, so we actually have it down the road, which we do right now, but we'd have it for a better type of lift system, which requires three-phase instead of your normal 240. And also, if we ever do go to electric buses, that would require three-phase. But right now, I think the guesstimate on that would be on us. The MEDEC gave us, or First Energy, whatever they're called, between 20 and 40,000 to run the poles up in the three-phase up to the property. So that would be an add-on. It's not in the contract, but that would be an add-on. And my recommendation, if you go forward, is to do that right now, because down the road everything goes up.
Will our architect be present for the Tuesday evening meeting? Okay.
Yes. The other thing is we will, that's included in this, we will hook up to the public water. Right now we have a well there. It's not contaminated, but tastes funny, so no one drinks the water. We just use it to wash the buses. And the line is right out front, so we hook up the public water there too. I would ask that when we do that, we have a separate meter for the wash bay, so we aren't paying sewer on what we're washing the buses with just for the bathrooms.
I think what I want to try and do is get with Kim and Allison and you, Brian, maybe to talk about some of the ways to present that information that evening, because this is a really significant investment, and I think this has also been an issue that we've gone on a long time, and we don't want to take for granted the fact that it's kind of been off our radar for a while. So I'll let everybody know about that, and if you have any suggestions about how to best do that, feel free to shoot me an email or shoot Allison an email.
All right. Policy Committee, Dr. Hamburger.
Thanks, Mrs. Wilson. We've got two policies on the agenda for our next board meeting, our voting meeting, and both of those policies are for second reading, so they've already been subject to some of our discussions and review. They've already passed for first reading, and if anybody has any questions or concerns about them, we can talk about it, but I have a feeling that most of you have had ample time to look at them and are satisfied with the wording. Title I comparability is a new change that is related to the requirement that we have for assuring that we're spending money equally among the various schools. And the volunteer policy basically just added the component associated with the senior citizen volunteer tax credit program, which we had been doing previously, but we just added it to a policy as per the changes in Act 20. Any questions on those two policies? Any concerns? Okay. So we'll be recommending that they move forward. Yeah.
Did we want to talk about our public comment policy at all?
I'm not prepared to talk about it, but we can talk about it, if you'd like to.
I think it was brought to my attention that we and other school districts have their public comment in the beginning for the purpose of talking about items on the agenda, and public comment again at the end for more open choice. So we were talking about if we would be interested in making that change to our policy. Currently, our policy says all public comments at the beginning of the meeting. Thoughts?
I think
I'm trying to locate the actual policy itself. Is it in the 900 section? 906 public, that's public complaint.
I think 903.
that'd be 903.
Public 903 is public participation in board meetings. Yeah, and I think in that particular policy, it currently reads that all public comment is at the beginning of the meeting. So yeah, I mean, if that's the interest of the board to kind of break that up and to kind of have non-agenda related comments at the end of the meeting, we can certainly, Dawn and I can work with PSBA and with with our solicitors to make sure that we have reading for your consideration.
So I'm sorry, just to confirm, you're saying comment in the beginning and a comment in the end.
Agenda related.
It's just, I think it's specific change, right? So that the comments at the beginning would have to be about an item that was on the agenda, and the comments at the end could be on any topic.
You have to sign up.
Yeah, I mean, we could maintain the same sign up. Again, I think this came out, I think we're talking with Sharon, and Sean, you can speak to this. I think the vast majority of districts handle it that way, so that if there's, some random issues that a whole bunch of people want to talk about, that the board can still get to the business of the board by having it focused on agenda items, get them completed, and then at the end, can have it be any topic whatsoever, but it narrows the focus to the agenda item, which is really why you have comment at the beginning, so the board can hear what the public has to say prior to the vote. And if the public wants to comment on non-agenda items, I think, and I don't know, Sean, if you have some information about why most districts do it that way beyond just kind of narrowing the focus.
Well, just for the reason that you said, plus there's a legal reason, obviously, for the Sunshine Act and everything. The public has to be given the opportunity to comment before the actual vote is taken. So that's why a lot of boards will leave it just for the actual agenda items, because that fulfills the obligation under the Sunshine Law that people can actually comment on something before you take official action. And then a lot of boards, because there's other topics that people may want to discuss, they throw in the comment section at the end too that's more wide ranging. It can be on virtually any subject. I mean, it's still the same limitations and everything else. You have to sign up. There's certain limited time they can speak, proper decorum, all that stuff. But it's just it just kind of allows it kind of pushes all of that extra stuff toward the back end. And a lot of times you'll take some of the heatedness out of things, let's say, because especially if it's not an agenda item and people just want to talk about it, it can be at the end of the meeting. And by that point in time, the voting's already done. And I found a lot of people leave at that point in time before they get to that.
So would there be a limit to the time frame when they can sign up for that second comment?
The way I normally see it done is it's literally the same sign-up sheet, and you can check whether you're talking before or at the end. So same type of idea, same sign-up sheet.
Just the one question I have is currently the allocation of time is limited to 30 minutes for public comment. So how does that work? Would there be 30 minutes in the beginning of the meeting, 30 minutes at the end of the meeting, or is it the total 30 minutes of public comment?
It's whatever you would want it to be. I mean,
I guess I'm asking the board, what do we see as our?
Well, didn't we vote on several occasions to extend that it was obvious a lot of people wanted to speak, so we would continue to do that, of course. We want to give everybody an opportunity to speak. I think all we're talking about here is separating the agenda versus non-agenda items, right?
I think he's thinking about cumulative property in terms of what you're
Yeah,
talking about.
I mean, is it, I guess the simple question is, I mean, is it 30 minutes allocated in the beginning and 30 minutes at the end, or is it a cumulative of 30 minutes for the entire public comment portion of our meeting?
I think we probably should just keep it the total of 30 cumulative minutes, and then keep track of it, and then we could vote
With
to
the
extend
provision
it.
that we could vote to extend it, yeah.
Okay, so
Gotcha.
keep it at 30, and I don't think we'd have to change that language then.
Would this public comment change? Would it be for the committee of the whole meeting and the voting meeting, or only the voting meeting?
Only the voting meeting, because the committee of the whole meeting, we have our comments at the end already because we do it before we actually move things to the agenda. So it would just be for the voting.
If we go forward with this, will this be on the next voting meeting?
We would
Or
have
just-
to do it as
just do it
first reading for the policy.
First reading and then okay, I got you. Maybe October.
But we could put it as first reading next month, this month.
Yeah, you could.
Yeah, we could if we got the language, in place that's satisfactory. I guess I'm reading the language here too. It doesn't make a distinction between committee of the whole meetings or voting meetings. I mean, it basically says that any public meeting of the board. So that distinction that you drew, Allison, in terms of like committee of the whole, where we're just doing it at the end, doesn't really seem to gel with the current policy.
So we might want to.
We may want to think about this a little bit more. Are we in a big hurry to get this done? Can you give some more time to kind of construct this so it makes sense and get some feedback from folks?
I would imagine that a lot of districts already have a policy that reads this way, right? That we could, I don't think it would take a long time to just look at some other districts' policy in that regard and just imitate it if it's a concern about the construction. In terms of the time frame, I would, obviously, Mrs. Wilson, that's whatever you want, but I'm imagining that there's plenty of sample policies that work this way.
There are, and they're written in a variety of different ways. I'm looking now as you guys are discussing this, and there's different options that are written based on the conversation that you're having right now in terms of committee of the whole versus voting meeting versus cumulative time versus beginning and all of those conversations. So I think there's plenty of language for us to sample from.
Okay, I know PSBA provides sample policies.
Yes, they do.
And we can actually see some other district policies.
Correct.
Okay, good.
One thing that I've always kind of seen as helpful too, and I just put this out there more as food to consider for thought. Sometimes when there are big issues in the community, the most obvious I think is probably the Exeter Antietam merger when that happened, or when we've had the bus facility discussions, or when the administration building was considering being moved to the Ridge Center. Some public agencies use a public comment period for agenda items. So they specifically make public comment for that agenda item right before that discussion. And I think occasionally, there may be some value in doing that, because I can remember the Antietam merger meetings got so, how do I want to say, paralyzed on that issue that they just started having meetings just about that issue. And maybe that's really the answer to that problem, but I just wanted to throw that out there as something to consider as well.
Okay, I think we'll work on that.
All right, thank you. All right, so then number 7 on our agenda is election of PSBA officers for 2022 that we'll vote on. This is the state, I believe it's for the PSBA president for the state or for our region? State?
Sorry. There is a regional rep, but it's also for the state, vice president, because vice president then becomes the president the following year. Board of directors, and the East Zone representatives for us.
All right, so we will vote on that
I think the first one you have to choose. You don't
Yeah.
even pick one. You have
Yeah,
to
can I
choose
ask that
between
question?
two.
How are we going to, I mean, all the other ones, it's pretty well defined. You know, numbers 2, 3, and 4, you know, there's no question who you're going to vote for. How are we going to separate the vote on number 1? Because we have 2 choices there for one position.
Normally, what I've seen before, someone makes a motion for one of them, and if it passes, then you don't go to the second one. So, you know.
So we should break that out separately, at least at the meeting, so we can
ask for a
have an
motion.
individual vote.
Motion and who they want to vote for. You know, the first motion that gets up there and gets a second, you vote for it. If you get the majority, that's the person you vote.
And just so I understand this, Brian, when we vote, we're only casting collectively one vote at convention.
You are casting the vote for the district. In fact, when you're done voting, I go online and put the votes right in.
Okay.
And I get a confirmation back.
Yeah.
Is there any information that comes with the candidates?
There should be a
yeah.
whole attachment on that, I believe.
Okay. Under the file attachments. Got it.
Yep.
It's difficult to choose between the two of them with just that attachment, frankly. Yeah.
A video brief with each one of the candidates.
I didn't realize.
Yeah, I think
that.
if you go to PSBA site, there's also, you can go.
I mean, right at the base of their brief bio is a video, like a 2-minute video presentation for each of the candidates. So I think it's worth looking at. I clearly had a favorite based upon the 2 that I saw, but I think everybody should really take a look at it. No.
That was an easy vote at Upper Dublin when that came up. Not so easy.
Okay.
By the way, just a quick second. I did share this with the board, but Upper Dublin School District was severely damaged by the tornado, and the board president, Art Levinowitz, is the head of PSBA. I believe all of the air handlers were ripped off the top of the high school. The pool was severely damaged. One of their elementary schools is severely damaged, and that community is really suffering tremendously. There was at least one person who lost their life when a tree fell on their house. So while we're bringing up art, I would just like to extend my thoughts to everybody in the Upper Dublin community. That was really a horrifying event for them, and will be a long time, I'm sure, recovering their school district. So, you know, it's a cautionary tale, I think, for school boards everywhere about the fact that these emergencies that we keep money in the back for really do happen. But again, to the people in the Upper Dublin community, and for Dr. Levinowitz on their school board, you know, I'm sure that I can say on behalf of all of us that our thoughts are with them going through this right now.
Okay. Before we move the items forward, it is time for public comment. And we did have 2 people sign up, but we do not have anybody here now. So we will move forward for the next voting meeting, our meeting minutes, the early graduation requests, the varsity baseball foul ball fencing protection, the draft of, the LERTA resolution, policies for the second reading, and possibly a first reading for the public comment policy, and the election of PSBA officers for 2022. Okay, is there anyone that would like to be heard at this time?
I just have one thing. I'm not to endorse Wawa, but if you guys are an administrator or a teacher or anybody, you get free coffee for the month. So go over there and get some free coffee. I think you have to show them your badge or something, but they'll give you free coffee. That's all I gotta say.
Sure, you want to endorse them? I will. And I can tell you that nobody bribed me to say that.
Okay. That concludes this meeting. Thank you very much.